The last time, the first time, the all time, the no time. Real quick, I sear your strip like bovine. I was here before the lo-fi. My whole closet low life. My whole team high five. Yes, sir, these 5 fingers of death. Been writing raw since you was drawn with chalk on the steps. All these dogs bark and they will gnaw upon your flesh. You brought your best, but you left with nothing left. Ha ha ha. Slain scholarship, slime time, doctorate, my Subaru autonomy.
Yeah, what he said. Hey, welcome to Law and Legitimacy this morning, everybody. We got some new tunes. Tell us about the Golden Spike, Mike.
This comes from one of my longtime and dear friends. His name is Kevin. We grew up together, and he's been doing the math and production thing for quite a long time. He doesn't do it full time. It really is sort of an artistic expression for him, a real outlet. So anytime he releases anything to the public, I like to spotlight that.
Well, here we are. And people find him if they like that. Listen, where do they find more of him?
Absolutely. They're at fkbs.bandcamp.com. I put it in the ticker below there.
That works for me. Thank you for the Golden Spike. So, hey, you know, the Republic continues to whirl and swirl, and you come to us looking for guidance, and we look elsewhere for guidance, and we're all like sheep. And we like sheep have gone astray. Isn't that what Handel says in the Messiah? And we are. And so our attention turns to Idaho. Idaho took a shot last week at the FBI. And so I was interested in that when Mike first brought the story to my attention. I thought, well, is this a sign of a roiling legitimacy crisis? Wherein there's a lack of norms that unite the country, and Idaho is on its own way. So Mike sent me the resolution condemning the Federal Bureau of Investigation. And I read through it expecting to learn something new, and really what it reads like is an old high school term paper on the FBI. We've got the broadsides against COINTELPRO, their harassment of Martin Luther King, and various other acts and omissions. They're embedding an agent with Whitey Bulger, their participation in spreading the hoax about Russian intervention in the Trump campaign in the form of the Steele dossier, which has now been discredited in large measure thanks to the brilliant work of John Durham as special counsel. And then we end up with the raid on Mar-a-Lago and so forth. And we come to the following. Now, therefore, be it resolved. The Idaho Republican State Committee condemns the Federal Bureau of Investigation for its misconduct, government overreach, and politically motivated weaponization. And, be it further resolved that the Idaho Republican State Central Committee calls upon the chairman to transmit this resolution to, a bunch of senators. God, I love Idaho. I have friends that have moved there. The thought has occurred to me from time to time that breakaway Republic of Idaho might be a better place to live. But if this is their idea of legislative activity, good luck with that. So let's talk about disbanding. I love the instinct to be critical of the FBI. I was breaking it off with some federal prosecutors on the phone last night. We were talking about some J6 related stuff. And so with respect to the Proud Boys under the federal sentencing enhancements at argument last week on the court's consideration of whether I can simultaneously represent Joe Biggs and Zach Rell, the government brought up the possibility of enhancing their sentences because of terroristic activity. And, so I'm on the phone with a prosecutor yesterday, and I said, are you guys serious about the terroristic activity? I mean, what are you talking about? Well, oh, yes, you saw that it was applied in the Oath Keepers case. And I'm thinking to myself, and I think I said aloud, just because you can do it doesn't mean you should. And I feel sort of that way about Idaho as well. I have my reservations about the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and there's a wonderful new book called G-Man. I think it's Beverly Gage, G-A-G-E. She just won the Pulitzer Prize for the book. I'm recommending it to all of you if you have any interest in how the FBI was formed, created, and functioned in the first 50 or 60 years of its existence, it's largely a biography of J. Edgar Hoover. And his life is the creation of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. And you do learn things about the Bureau that do not rebound to its benefit in the book. For example, J. Edgar Hoover's preoccupation and hatred of Martin Luther King led them to engage in a shockingly inappropriate and unlawful effort to undermine King in a way that would have supported litigation against the FBI had King actually been aware fully of what they were doing or had a taste to fight with them. And the FBI is a law enforcement agency. And maybe we don't need it. I mean, certainly Vivek Ramaswamy has talked about he would disband it if he were elected. That's sort of like me promising, popsicles at church when I become Pope. I mean, I think I'm as likely to become Pope, in other words, as Vivek is to become president. We're not going to disband the FBI anytime soon. But it's not even clear to me whether it can be controlled. Even back in the days of the Church Committee, back in the days when Congress was actively involved in oversight of the FBI has a history of refusing to turn items over to legislative oversight. And they do that because they're protecting their confidential sources and their manner and means of doing business. And that's something we all should be wary of. But I'm not sure you go from the fact that it has too extensive a set of powers that maybe enshrine a federal police power with centralizing tendencies that the Constitution, I don't think, ever intended the federal government to have. I don't think you go from that argument to the conclusion that somehow the FBI should be disbanded. Yes, it often gets things wrong. I'm looking at what Mike has on the screen. 4 defendants in the Gretchen Whitman kidnapping case were acquitted. A couple found guilty, and reservations that they were essentially entrapped by the FBI. The FBI does have agents.
Yeah, 2 were not found guilty. The other 2 were not found guilty. So 6 defendants, or 4 defendants, 2 were acquitted, 2 found not guilty, and that's been. There's been no real accountability for that whole fiasco. They've just kind of moved on in Michigan.
Well, I don't know quite what. I don't know what the answer is. There doesn't seem to be an appetite in Congress to take a serious look at the FBI. I mean, Jordan and the Oversight Committee and the Weaponization Committee, they're not gaining any real traction. And I don't know if that's Jordan's fault. I don't know if it's the divided politics of our time. I don't know if they're picking at the low-hanging fruit and not digging into what really needs to be dug into, which is the policy, infrastructure, and bureaucratic support.
No, I have a question. Is it possible? You're a father and also a extraordinarily successful lawyer by any.
Oh, I am. Thanks. Yeah.
By any practitioner's measure. I'm not talking about anything other than what you've done in your career. Is it possible that people in Congress don't know what success looks like? They don't have a vision for what succeeding looks like. I think that there's certain visualization, bring this back to athletics. There's certain visualization and self-esteem and confidence that goes with understanding what success looks like when you're making a certain effort, right? When you're striving for certain things. And politics is an interesting game, right? Very complex. And there are a few ways to look at this. I look at this resolution as sort of the GOP in Idaho just sort of patting themselves on the back for doing something.
It seems like, look, I love those people. Yeah, this is self-indulgent garbage.
So that's one way to look at it, and I certainly see that. That was actually my first impression, right? I'm reading through sort of in a listicle format, right? This is no different than something you would see on like a BuzzFeed, almost like a BuzzFeed article. You know what I mean? Because ultimately what they conclude with is that they just condemn, right? They condemn the FBI. Well, be it... now, therefore, be it resolved that the Idaho Republican State Central Committee condemns the Federal Bureau of Investigation for its misconduct, government overreach, and politically motivated weaponization. And be it further resolved that the Idaho Republican State Central Committee calls for reform of the FBI to ensure that it operates within the confines of the Constitution and respects the rights of American citizens. And be it further resolved that if the FBI cannot be reformed to operate within the confines of the Constitution with respect for the rights of American citizens, the Idaho Republican Republican State Central Committee supports the abolition of this corrupt government agency. All right, cool. And then it's just a bunch of like, how ridiculous is it that these footnotes are just hyperlinks?
Yeah, no, I mean,
what are we doing? What are we doing?
So you say, do they not know what success looks like? I don't think they have a coherent vision of what living together looks like. And so I am reminded over and over and over again of how powerful the conceptual argument about the social contract, the state of nature, natural liberty, rights retained by the people, government as an artifice, as government as a creation set to accomplish objectives within limited ends. I mean, those are the fundamental premises that served as the functioning, as the foundation of our government. And we've set into wheels this institutional structure that's bumbled along for several centuries and is approaching its third century of working. I don't think people have a realistic sense any longer of the limits, the metes and bounds of government, and why it's limited. And so when I look at the Idaho resolution, sure, there's plenty that the FBI does that I don't like. And sure, it's easy to say that what they've done is unconstitutional, but you have to have some legally sophisticated doctrine to push back on. And condemnation is not a sophisticated doctrine. Like it or not, if we're going to have federal law, we're likely going to have federal law enforcement. And if we're going to have federal law enforcement, that means we're going to have federal investigators. And if we're going to have federal investigators, that means they're going to be in some agency. And right now, that's the FBI. I don't think for a moment that anybody seriously thinks that we can just disband the FBI and go about our 19th century lives here in the 21st century, living happily ever after. Not with all the cybersecurity issues out there, not with international terrorism, not with money laundering, not with organized crime. I mean, to the extent that we're going to maintain the fiction that we live together under the rule of law and that everyone's rights are equal, there is always going to be a sense in which little people are preyed upon by big people. And big people come in the form of government, they come in the form of organized crime, they come in the form of groups organized to accomplish their will or enforce their will by acts of terror against the rest of us. And I think we, the people, have an expectation that one of government's roles is to make it possible for us to go about the day-to-day task of living without being preyed upon. The FBI should serve that role without becoming one of the predators. And so where I fault Idaho is in a cheap and quick grab to the history of the FBI and the easy talking points, but not in one instance have they done the hard work of analyzing what legitimate function the FBI was serving and how it got off the tracks and how it can be reformed to continue to perform its legitimate function and guarding against abuse. Because it seems to me inevitable that as long as we live together in collective lives and as long as we have government, there's going to be abuse and there's going to be the need to forever police the boundaries. And so calling for the abolition of the FBI is sort of like the Republican version of anarchism. Let's get rid of government and all live happily ever after. I don't like government any more than I like the next guy. I don't particularly like going to the doctor either. Government, doctors, they're all signs of failures in systems, and failure is foreseeable in human life, and therefore we need systems to protect against it. We need to assure that these entities operate with integrity. But what interests me about the Idaho call here is it's another sign of disintegration. It's Idaho basically saying we'd prefer to go it alone than go with the rest of you. Now, I realize this isn't an official act of Idaho's government, but it's something worth watching. And it does raise questions about whether anybody in the Oversight Committee in Congress really knows what they're doing right now. I have my doubts. I remind everybody of this wonderful book. We talked about it a few weeks ago. Got it sitting here. If you're interested in the FBI, take a look at James Risen's The Last Honest Man. It's an account of the church committee's efforts to get to the bottom of what was going on in the FBI in the 60s and 70s. Listen to or read Beverly Gage's book on G-Man, and then let's talk about what to do about the FBI. But Idaho should stick to potatoes right now.
I think I saw something. I saw something yesterday back and forth on this topic that discuss the possibility of forestalling any sort of FBI presence in Idaho, and I think I shared
That's not going to happen.
I shared that with you this morning, and so I'm just trying to take these things to the logical extremes. If the federal government uses the power of purse to basically foist upon states that are otherwise sovereign federal jurisdiction over certain things, right? There's, federal highways and infrastructure bills that get passed. There's all sorts of federal subsidization of, government operations at the state level. And this is, generally speaking, how the union stays a union, is this interplay, this intersection of states' rights versus federal rights. And when it comes to the executive powers that are, that go into law enforcement, that's something that is not irrelevant for purposes of that thought exercise. Is that what does it even look like for a state like Idaho to attempt to say, hey, this federal law enforcement agency, you have no jurisdiction here? I think that's a joke.
What it looks like is what the Deep South looked like in the 50s and 60s and even earlier, when the federal government tried to raise questions and tried to deter lynching. Citizens councils were created to say, your jurisdiction is limited here, FBI. You're not wanted. We're going to govern ourselves. I mean, to the degree that we aspire to be one people governed under the rule of law, there is a federal government, and federal law is the supreme law of the land. Idaho doesn't get a chance to opt out of the republic and say to the FBI, your badge is no good here. If the FBI starts to exercise its investigative powers by looking at some interstate act in violation of federal law in Idaho, and an Idaho official interferes with that Idaho official is going to be charged with obstruction of justice under federal law. And then what are you going to have? The state legislature charged with obstruction of justice, and the federal government coming down on that. That would provoke a constitutional crisis. That would sort of like be the Trump light version, of the prosecution of Donald Trump. Everything in our governmental system depends on a certain inchoate level of trust and the proper use of discretion of the government officials. When they overreach, we start to show the fissures and cracks in the system. And I think Idaho's attempts to defy the FBI reflect a deeper crisis in the republic, and it's an unrealistic response to that crisis. And it's a sign that the system is fractured and is coming apart, in my view.
Well, and I guess the last thing I'll say on this is that what's really disappointing about this resolution and the politics, how performative it all is, and I take that word from T Girl in the Rumble chat. She says performative, and that's mainly what this ends up being. But what bothers me about it is how thorough the historical timeline is. If you were serious if this GOP committee were serious, I think they would be preserving some dry powder for the ability to actually effectuate the ends that they're talking about, which would be the abolition of the FBI, and just kind of using every single instance of some sort of FBI misconduct, overreach, etc., in this list format really reduces the impact of any one instance that they enumerate there, right? And it kind of blends everything together and sort of dilutes the entire sort of populist feeling, I would think, at scale of the trust that has been lost within the FBI, and at one point what the FBI might have been. But it's not obvious from that historical timeline that there's any sort of path back or redemptive path that should be afforded, right? I think I said to you, Norm, it's like, I promise I won't cheat on you anymore.
Yeah.
Right? Like, if you cheat on me one more time, and it's like, I mean, look at the things that have been listed here, right?
No, it's not. Well, and it goes back too far to be meaningful. I mean, so to criticize the FBI for COINTELPRO ignores the fact that Frank Church and company, created new federal laws to rein it in. To talk about Ruby Ridge, ignores the fact that there was litigation thereafter. There's no real consideration of the internal structure and function of the FBI. It's a document in search of a serious agenda. I am in favor of taking a look at the FBI. For me, the most troubling thing about it right now is its widespread use of confidential human sources. But if you look at the history of the FBI, they've always had them. I mean, when J. Edgar Hoover was trashing Martin Luther King and writing confidential reports and spreading them around to federal agencies, or when Hoover and company were sharing bedroom tapes of Martin Luther King with foreign governments prior to King's receipt of the Nobel Peace Prize in an effort to have others close their door to King, Hoover would only show so much. He wouldn't betray the sources of their information, how they got it, because he feared that would compromise ongoing investigations. Hoover was preoccupied with the notion that communists were part of the civil rights movement, and so he would share information about communists' involvement with Martin Luther King, but he would never talk about how he got the information, because that would require him to reflect or disclose his method and means. You read that stuff about what was going on in the 60s and 70s, and you realize right now how little has changed. And so Idaho is right to raise questions about that, but rather than flapping its gums and giving us a bad piece of history, it's like they went to Google and said FBI abuses and wrote down everything they found. Rather than doing that, let's pick one particular controversy and let's dig in. And so I think the Biden investigation of Joe Biden, whistleblowers, CHSs, this would be a good place to dig in. Or Whitmer and the kidnapping plot against her.
I think the CHS stuff still that continues to be sort of the skeleton key with all of this, right? The effort that that federal law enforcement, in conjunction with the DOJ, the links to which they will go to ensure absolute opacity of information that would lead to any sort of real accountability or a verifiable audit of the activity, who wields discretion, who wields power of purse, what sorts of inputs are being used for data points, and then who's structuring policy. We will not know any of this unless we're able to crack the CHS code. Nope,
that's right. So let's get to it and let's pick a real fight, Idaho. Come on. Hey, so speaking of real fights, I guess there have been some developments in Planned Parenthood versus Stein since we spoke yesterday. What's going on?
Yep. So as of yesterday, the plaintiffs, so Planned Parenthood v. Stein, and for anyone that wasn't with us yesterday, this is...
Shame on you. Shame on you. Where were you?
First and foremost, I shouldn't be obligated to repeat myself. I'm just kidding. So the case before North Carolina's Middle District, it'll come before here in Greensboro tomorrow on a motion for a temporary restraining order. It's Planned Parenthood, and they have sued the state attorney general, Josh Stein, seeking to invalidate the North Carolina's new abortion law as ratified via a supermajority override of Governor Cooper's veto. So what happened last night? I think yesterday we talked about the various components of that law. It's bright line. It's a 12-week, no abortions after 12 weeks, subject to certain exceptions for medical anomalies affecting the life of the mother, and then certain rape and incest exceptions, but otherwise pretty narrow window. And this is something that I think has been long coming, but it is in the shadow of Dobbs' overturn of Roe v. Wade. And North Carolina's legislature does enjoy a Republican supermajority. And what that means is that in the Senate and in the House, those chambers have the ability to vote to override any governor-issued veto of a law that's passed. And that's what they've done with several laws, including what was Senate Bill 20. What happened overnight or yesterday was a submission to the court for updating evidence. And it is basically an admission, I guess a tacit admission by the legislature that perhaps they were too quick to let this bill go before those various chambers. And so they met on the 22nd and discussed revisions, and indeed voted to pass the revisions to this new law that would actually bring the plaintiff's case, Planned Parenthood's case, to a virtual close. And I say that in a rather conclusory fashion, but there were certain things in there, chief among them, there's nothing in here that would exempt someone who provides an otherwise lawful abortion from criminal conduct. right, under North Carolina's criminal code. That was shored up with one of those amendments. The reporting requirement for, within 72 hours of a minor getting treatment from one of these clinics, getting an abortion from one of these clinics, that was extended to 30 days instead of 3 days. And certain other updates that, each of these updates or amendments or revisions to the law that were proposed and
so does this make Stein a hero? Because what caught our attention with this is Stein, the Attorney General, was refusing to defend the law because he thought it was unconstitutional, or at least elements of it were, and he intends to run for governor. So he said, I'm not going to defend. Legislators got themselves substituted as parties so that they could defend, but now they've amended the statute apparently to head off this lawsuit, thus rendering the case moot and arguably letting Stein say, see, I was right, and but for my heroism and my decision to call attention to this, this may never have happened.
Well,
does he get to say that?
Well, no, I don't think so. He's still the state attorney general. And who is he? What is his job? What is his role? His role isn't to qualify what the legislature does, especially when he's the one being sued. And that, there is an interesting gamesmanship to the fact that the state of North Carolina and the legislature were not the named defendants. It was Attorney General Josh Stein that was the named defendant in the case brought by Planned Parenthood. And recall that yesterday we talked about the judge on Saturday allowing two defendants who motioned to intervene to join the case and actually be heard on the merits at this motion for temporary restraining order. Those two intervening defendants were none other than President pro tempore of the Senate, Phil Berger, and the Speaker of the House, Tim Moore. So they're now going to be heard on the merits in Greensboro tomorrow. But
do you still plan to go?
I do. I plan to go. I'll be there. It probably is going to be a little bit of a circus, but I think that ultimately I want to see who is there. I saw a few more motions for admission of counsel and then notifications of appearance. So interested to see who's representing whom and how the court is going to approach this issue now of mootness. I can put this on the screen if you give me one moment here, Norm. I will find.
So mootness is while Mike does that, what does moot mean as a matter of law? When you bring a case to court, at least in federal court, and I think it's true in state courts too, you have to allege a case or controversy, something that is justiciable, something for which there can be a remedy. And when a case becomes moot, the problem that it addressed no longer exists. When you filed the suit, and it was the case that the state passed a law against walking on the street at 9 a.m. You file a lawsuit that's going to somehow affect your fundamental right to travel. The state repeals the statute while your suit is pending. There's no longer a case or controversy there. The controversy has become moot. And so I think what we're saying here with respect to Planned Parenthood versus Stein is to the degree that the statute had particular targets, the notification period, the explicit exemption for potential criminal prosecution, and so forth. The legislature has headed off the lawsuit by amending the statute during the pendency of the suit, thus permitting whoever appears to defend the statute to say there's no case or controversy, it's moot. The court should not extend its jurisdiction to enter an order in this case. I still think, Mike, that although Stein's role is to defend the law, I still think he's going to declare victory as a result of this.
Oh, I don't doubt for a second that he's going to declare victory, because that's what he's doing. I mean, he's campaigning to become governor. Mm-hmm. And I think that was a political move on his part. I don't know that I've ever seen anything like that, where the sitting state attorney general, takes to his personal social media account and says that, I'm for women's rights. I'm not going to defend parts of the lawsuit that I think are unconstitutional. And it's like, I don't even understand where your personal principles have anything to do with your obligation to the citizens of North Carolina and to our system of justice here, right?
Well, let me push back. If he truly and genuinely believes that the legislature enacted a law that's unconstitutional and his job as the state's top lawyer is to advance the law. Does that mean he defends North Carolina, whether right or wrong, or isn't his primary obligation still to uphold the Constitution and laws of the state of North Carolina and of the United States of America? And wouldn't he be within his bounds in that case to say, while I am the state's top law enforcement official, I believe the state has acted unlawfully? Is he obliged to defend principles that he thinks are indefensible?
What he's obliged to do is check to ensure that proper procedure was followed. If he had some sort of procedural argument to say that this law as enacted was somehow legally flawed, right, as a procedural matter, then I would have more room to agree with what you're saying.
Well, let's say that North Carolina, in a paroxysm of racial animosity, that enacts a new statute to bring back lynching. Would he be required to defend that statute if it was procedurally proper?
If it was procedurally proper, he would still be obligated to show up and respond substantively to the claims made.
And what if his response substantively is it's correct in procedural form, but substantively I don't believe it's lawful? Does he have the right at that point to say I will not defend?
Well, what question are you really asking? Is it that he advocates to the best of his ability on behalf of his client, or that he substitutes his personal moral compass in exchange for that of what
neither.
Right?
Neither. I think there's an intermediate position, and that is that while a law may be correct, have been passed in a procedural form that is correct, it still may be substantively unconstitutional. And so does he not have the right, and I'm playing devil's advocate here, does he not have the right as the state's top law enforcement officer to say, my client erred in this case and I can't defend it?
No. I do not believe he has that right. And if I'm wrong, I'm happy to be.
You may be. I don't know. I mean, we don't have to resolve that here today.
We just have to. The fact that there are organizations and advocacy groups, namely the Planned Parenthood, in this respect, that is going to bring a cause of action and move for immediate enjoyment of the application of that law, right? And so for Stein to be the named defendant here, and to say, okay, I'm only going to enforce parts of the things that I think are constitutional. What does that have to do with Planned Parenthood's claims as it pertains to that law? What we have here, so I'm going to remove this to another context. So in a matter of contracts, North Carolina adopts what's known as the blue pencil doctrine. And you'll see certain provisions in contracts as well that say, certain parts of this is called severability. And you'll see it in all sorts of bills and laws, et cetera, if you read down far enough to say if any part of this document or of this act or what have you is deemed to be unconstitutional or unenforceable by a court of competent jurisdiction, that doesn't affect the balance of this document in full. So even if Attorney General Josh Stein thought that certain parts of the law were unconstitutional, it does not remove him of the obligation to defend the act as duly ratified by the North Carolina legislature, right? And it was vetoed by the governor, and yet there's still a law that allows a supermajority in the legislature to say, no, we're overriding your veto. This is to become law. And that's what happened here. So what of those parts of the act then, Norm, that are substantively constitutional in that fact pattern, right?
I don't think he said he wouldn't defend anything. I think he just said he wouldn't defend parts. I don't know that
parts, right? So is his judgment on that something?
In most states, the Attorney General is an elected constitutional officer, and I believe they're elected to in part to use their judgment into determining what to do and not to do. I'm not saying that doesn't raise serious problems, Mike. I think it's another area in which the law becomes somewhat gray.
I only think that he gets away with a departure from procedural norms because of the party that he's running under.
It may be, but I'm trying to depoliticize the decision and analyze it as a legal matter and wonder at what point he loses the ability to say substantively, I think the law is wrong. Like Freedom Lover is taking a shot at me. It's not the same thing, even the same thing, Norm, to the bring back lynching thing. One is legalizing murder. The other is protecting life. There are passionate disagreements about abortion. Some would say that, pro-life people say it's a law against abortion protects innocent lives. Pro-choice people would say a law against abortion eliminates the right to choose. And then there's going to be passionate disagreement about where these one begins and the other ends. I'm not sure that an elected official, in this case Josh Stein, is obliged to follow the legislature wherever it leads. I think that's something North Carolina voters need to decide, and they need to evaluate Stein's conduct and decide whether he overstepped the line.
I think that one thing that we should not let alone here is the fact that he is, as of January of this year, he is running for governor.
Yeah,
so
I get that too.
He does that is sort of a headline or a departure from otherwise established norms within the practice of law and within the halls of government needs to be analyzed from a perspective of why are there ulterior motives for him making such what is really a radical decision, right?
I get it.
On an issue as fundamental as abortion, right? This is something that has been in a battleground politically for as long as I can remember, as long as I've been alive. That has been one of the, foundational cornerstone, fractional issues within American society is this issue of abortion. For him to be running for governor, but then also as the chief legal officer, as it were, of the state of North Carolina, to get on his pedestal and take a position on a case like this one is not, to me, it's not.
Maybe it's a conflict of interest. It should disqualify him from serving as Attorney General.
1,000%. And that's what I mean in terms of, the optics here are obvious. He wants to kind of get that middle-aged, white, suburban, whatever vote, right, that exists here in North Carolina. And I'm not sure that he's so wrong in terms of the strategy, but I am saying that as someone who respects the fact that these institutions need to at least have the veneer of legitimacy, right? He's really deconstructed a lot. What precedent is he setting for someone that supplants him and perhaps has a different political persuasion, right? The next time this happens, I don't know that it will be taken as kindly as it is.
All right. Well, we'll return to the topic. I just raised the issues, Mike, to think about it critically. Dawn McNeil, welcome, a new listener. I've not seen your name here before.
Hey, Dawn.
FBR tried to overthrow the president of the United States via James Comey. So no big deal, Norm. We need them. I don't think that's what I was saying at all. I'm simply saying that in the business of living together, there are always going to be those who seek to take advantage of the law. And one of the things we count on government is for equal-handed application of the law. When government errs and tries to overthrow the president of the United States, then they behave in a lawless manner and need to be held to account. But I don't think that, we throw away the speed limit because sometimes when you observe it, you arrive late to your destination. I just think that you ask yourself critically, why do we need this law? Why do we need this institution? And when it errs, how do we correct it? I think the instinct to throw the baby away with the bathwater is a sort of anarchistic impulse.
It does call into question what the core purpose of the FBI and even the CIA. But while we're on the topic of the FBI, we'll stay there. Of what the core purpose of the FBI was at its inception, and then what it has transformed into over the last 50 or 60 years. That therein lies, I think, the issue and sort of the populist upheaval with respect to these federal law enforcement agencies that operate in the shadows, that have permeated every major social media platform that we have been shown to be involved in every major topic that is newsworthy, from presidential candidates to sitting presidents to various shootings to various riots, etc. So there is an institutional crisis for the FBI. I think what we're asking here is, what in the hell does the Idaho GOP think it's doing to help resolve that by issuing a resolution that just is little more than a BuzzFeed listicle of, the historic transgressions of the FBI against the citizens of the United States? Come up with some better ideas. Stop complaining.
Yeah, and that's what we're trying to do. Stop complaining and come up with ideas. So, we've talked our way through another 39 minutes of your life this morning. Thank you for listening to us. As always, we're spotting issues, trying to understand the pros and cons, and trying to shed light on dark places so that you can make better choices about how to live your life today, tomorrow, and the next day. We have a troubled history. We have a troubled present. We'll have a troubled future, but we might be able to make better music out of the trouble that we have, just as the Golden Spike with which we began made better music today, and we'll end with that. Mike, how do people find us?
You can find us here every morning, Monday through Friday at 8 a.m. That's Rumble Video, YouTube Live, Twitter Live as well. Please follow us on Twitter at Pattis Podcast. We're loving the traction that we're getting over there, and we're loving the interactions that we're having as well. Love to see new people in the chat as well. Dawn, thank you for coming and stopping by and actually leaving a comment. Please do continue to do so. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play, Overcast, Audible, and anywhere podcasts are found directly after the streams are over every day. And if you are so inclined, you can find us on Locals, lawandlegitimacy.locals.com. We're seeing a small surge in members and subscribers there too. So thank you to all of the new members and subscribers, and thank you most of all to the OGs, the day ones. I think I was talking with Norm the other day and just remarking that we, our Rumble views are sort of suppressed. Our YouTube views are kind of growing in an odd way. Twitter has become a really good outlet for us. But overall, we've never seen more traction. So, personally, I get texts and calls, and we get, various comments and messages and emails. We're loving that. Please share. That's the biggest thing we'd ask you to do, is leave a thumbs up on the video and share Law and Legitimacy.
One of our regulars stopped in to see me on Sunday to discuss something, Mike, and I'm not going to mention the regular, but this regular, who may have been a woman, said, "Mike's kind of hot. So you've got followers, Mike."
Don't tell my wife.
Of course, I did. Well, no, she was blind. I didn't tell you that.
Awesome. Well, Norm, go get him today. I'm gonna get to it. I'm sporting my Grasshoppers baseball uniform today, welcoming in all of the political turmoil to come tomorrow in federal court. So we'll see you tomorrow morning, and then I'll be reporting from the federal courthouse here in Greensboro.